Welcome to Holistically Speaking. I'm Hilary Russo, certified holistic health coach and health and wellness journalist. This is an empowering place to explore self-awareness, self-love, and transformation through health, healing, and humor. By sharing life-changing experiences, knowledge, and guests with varied expertise, we'll explore who we are, how we got that way, and what it takes to be a happy and healthy grown-up. Mind, body, and spirit. I'm glad you're here. When we are in the face of adversity, we have no choice but to ask questions, right? And man, oh man, have we been faced with a lot over the past year. So get this. A recent study came out that shared that since the beginning of the pandemic, 72% of office workers do not want to return to the office full time. Time suddenly mattered in a whole new way. So let me ask you this. How does it matter to you? When the People Reader, communication expert Michelle Mills-Porter shared that statistic with me, I have to admit I wasn't surprised. Again, this goes back to how we choose to live our lives. What matters most? It's amazing how tragedy can wake us up sometimes. And Michelle, she knows plenty about that. You see, in 2004, Michelle happened to be caught up in what is considered one of the worst natural disasters in history, the Boxing Day earthquake and tsunami. And afterwards, she noticed something different about the people around her and herself. On this episode of Holistically Speaking, Michelle shares more about how she not only recalibrated her core values, but her connections and communication. She also shares what you can do to discover your own essence, to live a life of infinite possibilities. Michelle, I am so elated to have you on Holistically Speaking, sharing your story, sharing your expertise, sharing your joy. I found you or came across you on, I think it was a TED Talks, and I was just enamored with you. The whole idea, being in the world of communication as I am for years, ever since I walked out of college, knowing that there are other ways of communicating it sparks curiosity with me. And here you are, you're an expert in non-visual and non-verbal communication. I'm so intrigued by that, on how we can communicate in other ways. But I would love for you to share your story and your humor, because you crack me up.
Yeah, there's different levels of humor, and I'm certainly not going to share my stand-up stuff with you today, Hilary. It's too naughty, far too naughty.
We'll buy tickets to that show.
You'll have to.
So tell us about Michelle and basically your journey. I would love to know, and I know our listeners would love to know, about how your work came about. You've been in this field for quite some time, but you have your own trauma to triumph story. But going back to creating that space for non-visual and non-verbal communication, can you touch on that?
Sure. I think there's probably an intuition muscle that is exercised in some children in their fundamental years. Quite often that comes with a nervous child or a child that's been through adversity in any way, shape or form, and they have to exercise that muscle. And it gives them an advantage, I think. And I've got to be honest, growing up, I moved around a lot as a child, from one school to the next. And I didn't make those key connections that are so important in the fundamental years of growing up. And so I struggled. I didn't have friends, and I was intrigued as to find out what made people popular. How can you build rapport with other people? And I guess that's what switched on my my interest in the whole subject. And then I joined the Air Force at 17 years old and went out to see the world. Got married, was a disaster of a relationship, as it quite often is in the forces. And I was out of that marriage within the year. 10 months, I think I lasted. It turned out to be very abusive and quite violent. And I have too much respect for myself. So I was out of there. And again, it forced me to look at, what can I do? How can I build rapport with people? How can I get on? I'm forced into another world of not knowing, where I belong. And I found myself flicking through the pages and the situations vacant and realizing that people in sales seem to have it made, because there were loads of jobs for salespeople and they were really well paid. And I thought, flipping heck, if I can get a job in sales, I'm made. And so I decided to have a look at it, and I fell into a telesales career. So that's, selling over the phone. And that's my first, I was brilliant at it, Hilary. Brilliant. I just loved meeting new people and building these relationships out of thin air over the phone using this tiny little device. It was just incredible. And I guess that's my first insight into communicating in the non-visual sense. So that became my expertise for many years. And in fact, right up through the years, I grew and grew and grew. So my last employed position was as head of client development for a branding agency. And I was using this tiny little tool with no visual access or visual communication with the people I was dealing with massively successfully. And then I left and joined and kind of launched my own company, which was doing that for other organizations. So I built a whole army of people that and taught them to use the phone in the way that I did. So that was my first kind of insight into non-visual communication.
Well, I imagine, you're such a great communicator, and you're so pleasant to talk to. And like I said before, it's like, I'm like talking to Mary Poppins. But even when I saw you for the first time, and you were just a delight to listen to, you're funny. And I know, and and I'm sure our listeners know, the element, that added element of visual, especially in communication, is not something that's been around so long. And when we have ways like Zoom to communicate and Skype and all these ways to, or even Squadcast right now as we're using, these are great ways to engage visually. But the art of communication has been around for so much longer, when we have just had to really tune in and listen, right? Mm. So when you get a call from someone in customer service, or you're calling them, a lot of times you're either turned off by who they are and how they approach you, and you just have a different way of approaching people. How do you connect on that way to keep it so positive?
Well, I think the first thing is that you have to build rapport really quickly. So you have to do something that takes you off track and makes you different. So whether that's using humor, or whether it's using your personality, or something that makes you different, that engagement really quickly is something that's very important. But what you have to do, and it's funny you should mention actively listening, you have to literally switch up your hearing, and you have to listen in a different way. If you imagine some people, if they lose their eyesight, I've got to mention Daniel Quiche. Daniel is a really good friend of mine, love him to bits. He's quoted in my first book, Phone Genius, and he taught me a lot about not having sight. And there are some people that when they lose a sense, some of their other senses get switched up to compensate. And if you can imagine, that's the way it is when we're communicating with no visual context. So we have to switch up our hearing to a different level. This is why people who have worked on the phone for a period of time are quite often far, far better communicators, because they know how to do it with a handicap, so to speak. And if they can do it with that handicap, then actually going into an environment where you have added senses built into that, they're just automatically better. And you mentioned things like Zoom and podcast and Squadcast. The problem that a lot of people make, Hilary, is they treat it like it's visual communication, when actually it's not. Because the majority of the time, especially if you're speaking, if I'm doing a keynote, I'm looking at this tiny little hole in the middle of the webcam. I'm not seeing the sea of faces around me. So I can't pick up on their their facial expressions. I can't get readings from their facial expressions. I can't communicate in that way. So actually communicating even on Zoom and podcasts and things like that, it's still non-visual communication skills that we need to use.
So how do we better our communication skills in that area? I always talk about active listening, both with my students, with my clients, and just with friends and family. I mean, it really is about tuning in. And of course, the listeners of this podcast, there is a difference, really tuning in, because even in the visual, we tend to tune out. We're looking around, like what's in her room, what's behind her or him. And we need to bring ourselves back to really listening. And I would imagine that's something you truly focus on.
You kind of get honed in when you don't have that visual distraction. So it's a good thing in many ways. But the way to exercise those skills is practice. And the way that I teach people to practice is, number one, get yourself a blindfold, and communicate with a blindfold on. The second best friend is watching your TV with the sound down and trying to read what other people are saying, trying to look at their facial expressions and see what's going on. This all goes into the second stage of my communication, which is the non-verbal communication. But the non-visual stuff, one of your friends is a voice recording, a video, your voicemail message. If you can leave yourself messages and then listen back to them and see how you interpret that, it's the best way to learn. If you can video yourself, even if it's just the recording, the audio, and then play it back, what you'll find is that we rely on our visual gestures and all the hand gestures that we make and the facial gestures as being able to communicate. But if you take that away, you'll realize that you need to put more inflections into your voice. You need to make it more interesting. You need more light and dark, light and shade, and you need those inflections. And it might feel a little bit animated at first, but once you practice it over and over and over again, you get used to being able to use the flexibility of your voice.
Yeah, it is about pressing record and listening back. I don't think we do that enough. And a lot of times we're really critical when we hear ourselves. We tend to be very critical. I notice that with my students when I'm teaching communications at the university, that they have a hard time listening to themselves. I play back and they're like, "Oh, I hate my voice. Oh, I don't like how I sound." And if you're not happy with how you sound, how do you overcome that?
Well, you see, you've hit onto another point there, because actually when we look at digital communication, what that does is it strips out so much of the personality of your voice. And that's purely, the difference between using the digital blueprint and not. It's a blocky version. It's a digitized version of somebody's voice, and it leaves loads of sexy elements of your voice and lots of those kind of the riffs and the light and shade is just chopped out in a digital format, and that's really difficult for people to get their head around. But if you're using anything digitized in your communication, then you have to overcome that by putting more personality into your voice. So if you imagine that when you're speaking to somebody over the phone or you're speaking to somebody over camera, you want to try and project your own self so that you're right in the room with them. And one of the ways to do that is to put more personality into your voice, and allow yourself to be transported into the same room as them.
Yeah, being engaging really matters. And when we had our first conversation, you gave me a really sweet compliment about that, about just how you bring light and you're engaging. And I felt that same way with you, which will take us into something we're going to talk about later, which is the essence analysis that you do. But that true feeling of being able to connect and align with people and not use all your senses, knowing that somebody has their eyes shut and when you're talking, they feel like they're connecting with you, or just in your presentation of how you're appearing, and maybe they have the sound off and they're watching you. There is something that can be really said about being able to connect with people with certain senses being removed, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the work you do? Do you get a lot of questions?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's my life's work. What I do now is, you know, I guess, do you feel that you're on this planet for a reason? You know, because
Absolutely.
that's the thing, you know, I always want to, and it's cheating because I've seen your Essence results. So I know that you'll feel like that too. But that feeling of having purpose on this planet is so important to me. And that's why I open my eyes and my ears and every sense that I have to the opportunities that come my way, because I want to grab them and make the most of them and make sure that I'm fulfilling what I'm meant to be doing on this planet, you know, for however long I've got here. And what I'm doing at the moment really feels like my life's work. And it will do until something else comes along and teaches me something different. What I want to do is just give people that sixth sense, you know, and that's what I've spent my life doing, trying to find this sixth sense and put it into an analysis, put it into a training program so that I can give it to other people and make them brilliant communicators.
If we could communicate better on this planet, I think it would make a big difference. So much is misconstrued and things are taken out of context, especially with text, with emails. Sometimes we say things with certain inflection and we don't necessarily mean it. It's really about stepping back before we say something. And I think we're all guilty of it. And, you know, because it's our expectations of how another person should react, right? But if we take more time to really truly learn how to communicate well and use our senses differently and together, I can only imagine that it would be a much better world.
Let me share something with you, Hilary. I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned being caught slap bang in the biggest natural disaster in our living history, which was the Boxing Day Tsunami, what I found was that in the face of adversity, it really doesn't matter. And what that does is it smacks you in the face and makes you realise that we are being oversensitive and, you know, and overcritical in our everyday life. When it comes down to it, believe you me, we have a compassion and a benevolence about us that helps us to forgive each other for the little foibles. You know, communication is so easy. When your back's against the wall and you're coming together, communication is not an issue. If we've got a garden full of people that all speak different languages, and if we can work together like a well-oiled machine, even if we don't speak the same language, that teaches us something in the world that we go back to. You know, stop making it difficult for yourself. Don't be oversensitive. Don't jump on everything. Don't be political. Don't say he said this and she said that. Just have a bit more understanding. It's that understanding that helps us to communicate.
I'm so glad that you moved into this topic because it really was the story of you being caught in that tsunami that pulled me in and said, I need to connect with Michelle and have you on the show. Because that story in itself, I mean, natural disasters happen everywhere all over the world, but to be caught in the middle of a tsunami and really question everything in your life in a moment when you don't even know how long that moment's going to last, I would imagine that made you think about things in a whole different way. And if you could share, I would be so happy if you could, you know, I want to hold space for you to share that, if you will.
Sure. Well, we'd gone with a team of divers from the UK. We'd learnt to dive, and we'd gone over to Sri Lanka in Christmas 2004, and we got caught smack bang in the middle of the Boxing Day tsunami. So we were in Hikkaduwa, which is the never eat shredded wheat, southwest coast of Sri Lanka. I always have to do that. And the tsunami hit really badly. I mean, there were nearly 4,000 people around about. Hikkaduwa that lost their lives. We were on the third floor. Stuart and I were on the third floor of our hotel room when it hit, and we were stranded there for quite a while. And eventually we managed to get out and we managed to make it to safe ground. And we stayed in Jimmy Lal's house. So Jimmy Lal was a village elder and a businessman and very well respected. And he had a house at the top of the hill. And when I first walked into that garden, it was just a sea of people that were sheltering and had been taken there, and it was in that garden that I spent a week of my life as a refugee. And it was possibly the most enlightening time of my life ever, because what I learned in a week about humanity was astonishing. And what it did is it actually recalibrated my core values. It brought me back to what my core values were. I thought that, this company I'd created out of nothing that was doing phenomenally well, winning every award going and turning over an astronomical amount. And, I thought that was what I was meant to do. I thought that's it. That's my path. But being caught in this, it makes you think and it makes you reevaluate what's important in your life. And there is a connection, Hilary, with what people are going through right now. What we've been through in terms of the pandemic has done exactly the same thing. It has recalibrated people and reminded them what's important in their life. That's why 72% of office workers do not want to go back to the way it was. That's why we don't want to go back, because we've realised we want more time with our children. We want more time for us. We want other things in our life rather than being stuck on this hamster wheel of being stuck in traffic and going to work on a daily basis and wasting a big portion of our lives.
That can be, that just hits the nail on the head. And not everyone is going to go through something as traumatic as being in the middle of a tsunami. We've all been witness to different things in our life that could be trauma related. And you don't necessarily have to go through something so unbelievably traumatic to feel a shift happening in your life. So what you went through obviously was scary, I imagine. You don't know what's happening in the next moment. How are you going to get home? All of these feelings that we feel. And I think we've been through a number of things. Obviously the pandemic has hit all of us. And then, things like 9/11 that happened nearly 20 years ago, and people that have been here longer on the planet that have been through other things. But even little upsets in our lives are a moment to step back and realize, am I living in my true values and my purpose? And how can I be better and create more understanding?
Absolutely. And there is no competition. There is no one trauma that is worse than another trauma. And your brain certainly doesn't know the difference between falling over and scraping your knee, and going through something worse. It's all in the same bag. So it's a moot point trying to compare one person's trauma with another. Any adversity will have the same effect. And it's just because I was witness to this, and I had nothing to do. I couldn't do anything. I just had to wait until, we could possibly get out of there. So there was nothing I could do apart from observe and open my ears and my eyes and my mind to everything that was going on. And I'm so grateful for what I went through, Hilary, because what I saw in adversity is the key. What is the key to humanity? And I saw straight through to the core of people, and it was absolutely astonishing. Even the grumpiest people that have got this benevolence inside of them, and it's beautiful. Humanity is gorgeous, and I'm so privileged to have been in the position where people's backs are against the wall and then they show their true colours, because our true colours are just incredible.
I love that. And I don't even want to say that it's unfortunate that something like that has to happen before we see that, because it just goes back to like the core of who we are, our cellular level, the being that we are created, from dust. Here we are, and we all have that ability to be that unbelievable, colorful, beautiful being and share space with each other in the most beautiful way. Moving into a new space and learning from the lessons, turning your mess into your message on a much more powerful level, and your traumas into your triumphs. That's where the essence analysis comes in. And I want to touch on that because it really is, when I did it, when you sent it to me, it had me sit back and think. And I feel like I know my core values, but we tend to question ourselves a lot, take too much time to answer, right? And let's touch on the essence. And because something you did mention, and I wanted to say before in our last conversation, you said, if we're going to evolve, look after your people, you have to look after yourself. And I remember you saying that to me. So how does this all parlay into our core values and that the essence of who we are?
So going again, it goes back to the tsunami, but in the aftermath of that tsunami, I realized that I thought I knew about people, and yet people that I knew were behaving in ways that I didn't expect them to, for the better most of the time. But I didn't understand that. They were showing me things that were hidden behind their everyday mask. And it was gorgeous. And it was like, why do we walk around with this mask on, hiding who we truly are? Why do we not show our magnificence to the rest of the world? Well, it's because we don't realize that we have it a lot of the time. And so I set about trying to create something that peeled back those onion layers and got to the core of that person and showed them what really drives them, what gives them fire in their belly. And I learned over the years that if you align yourself to what really gives you fire in your belly, that is what gives you energy. It's what gives you power. It's what gives you fulfillment and purpose. And purpose is the elixir of life. It's been proven that the people that live the oldest on this planet are the ones that have the strongest purpose. Purpose is the lifeblood, and it was just one of those things that developed. I learned everything I could about behavior, human behavior, how we differ, how our brains work, the neuroscience of it all. And I stumbled across core values as being one of the analyses. And I don't know whether core values is the right word, because when you say to someone, what are your core values? They say what you said. Well, I know what my core values are. But actually what you'll tell me is what you aspire them to be, what you are working towards being. What are you now? What truly drives you? And that's what we need to get to. And those are the things that are formed in your fundamental years when you're a young child. And that is quite often because of your situation. It could be because of your culture, the way you were brought up, the people around you that influenced you, your religion, lots of different things that had an influence on making you decide what is right and what is wrong. And so eventually, after years and years of, distilling and marinating, I ended up coming up with Essence, which is a way of actually making sense of all of these core values. So there are only 6 core values, and I leant towards the model of Edward Spranger, who wrote a book back in the 1920s called Types of Men. And I kind of leant very briefly on his theory of these 6 different kind of values. And I adopted that model, and I have 6 core values, which are umbrellas more than anything else. And quite a few of our values will fit under those umbrellas, but it's the only way to be able to make sense of it and measure ourselves against each other and help us to understand who we have natural rapport with and who we might have to work a little bit harder with because of those core values, maybe being in a juxtaposition with the others. And that's how Essence was born. And it's a very simplistic online analysis, but my gosh, it's spot on.
And let me just say, I was so excited when I heard that our values are so similar. when you came back and you shared with me how close our analysis was to one another, I was like, yeah, I was excited because I feel like you align with people, right? What they say, let your vibe attract your tribe. And we want to create that environment around us. So when you told me that, and I read how we were similar in so many ways, I was actually really jazzed about it.
You talked about, being fired up when we first met, and the feeling was absolutely mutual. I was like, yay, sister from another mister. I love
I
this
love
woman.
that.
I love this woman. And there is a natural attraction to people that share core values. And we mustn't get this wrong, Hilary. I have to be very, very strong about this. You don't have to share core values to get on. In fact, having a world full of people that share your core values is going to be a very boring place, and you're not going to be stretched and you're not going to be kept in check. However, when you find two people that share core values, especially as close as ours are, you can't help but let them skip off into the sunset once in a while, because it's fun.
Oh, that sounds like a fun idea. Let's skip off into the sunset. I'm not sure Stuart would be happy with that plan.
Well, he can
We'll
carry
come
the
back.
drinks. He can carry the drinks.
Well, I mean, you consider yourself a people reader, which you definitely are. And how did the experience with the tsunami and the traumas that you've dealt with in your own life, how did that become stronger after these upsets that you dealt with, becoming that people reader?
Well, it was a choice. I realized that even though I thought I was good at reading people, I obviously didn't know as much as I wanted to, because, as I said, people were doing things and behaving in ways that I didn't expect. And that really bugged me. So if something bugs me, I have to fix it. And so when I got home, I kind of tied up my business, and I rehomed all my staff, and I just turned the chapter off and set on a new journey. And that was to learn everything I could about human behavior. So I made it my specialism, through learning and through research and through creating my own analyses. So I've created my own behavior profile. I've got Essence, the core values analysis, and I have the people reader. Now, the people reader is actually an analysis that helps people to be able to read other people without having to have all the skills. It's a shortcut. And I initially designed it to be the stabilizers in one of my training programs. And I'm like, look, just here are the answers. Just here's an online analysis. If you want to read Hilary, answer these questions about her, and it will spit out the answers and tell you how to build really brilliant, deep rapport with her based on all my knowledge of the non-visual communication, the non-verbal communication, and the behavior profiling. And so that's really how I got my moniker, the people reader. It's based on the people reader analysis, which just gives you the answers. The hope is that if people were to use the people reader analysis, after a period of time, they kind of know what the questions are going to be. So they're subconsciously looking out for that. So what I'm doing is very sneakily getting them to exercise those muscles. And after they've used a few of these analyses, they'll never need to use another one again, because they'll have picked up those skills.
Well, I am so excited to actually go through the analysis with you, because it's a lot that came back at me, and I was starting to read it last night and this morning when you contacted me. And it's just, it's awe-inspiring to just learn more about yourself on the subconscious level, because so much of our brain, that subconscious versus the conscious brain, it's not a 50-50, it's like 80-20, or I think it's actually even more than that. But the ability to kind of sit back and learn more about who you are, and then have somebody who, like yourself, that people reader, who can really break it down and help you and see from the outside looking in, is quite phenomenal. And by the way, listeners, Michelle has graciously offered a free Essence analysis to those who are listening. And I will share a link of how to get in contact with her to do that, because it is brilliant. And I'm at a loss at words, because there's so many of those kind of analyses out there. You've got the Myers-Briggs, everybody's creating something, but you have a background with what you're creating, and research. And as someone who works in neuroscience and mental health, we need to be able to tap into these things so that we have a much clearer understanding of who we are and who we want to be and how we want to fulfill our space in this world, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's so simplistic as an analysis in comparison to the others. And the reason it's simplistic is very simple. Sometimes when you hold that mirror up to people and say, do you know what? This is you. This is what puts fire in your belly. This is what motivates you. This is what you need to align to if you want to be fulfilled. Sometimes that can be a whoa moment. So it has to be simplistic in its delivery. But it's so powerful because if you have any adversity or argument, to go to your essence analysis and just look at the last page and say, which of my core values is being challenged? Why am I so upset with what's happened? If you can identify which of your core values is being challenged and therefore why you feel so emotional about it, it's very easy for you to fix it. It's all there in black and white, I've just,
it's so simple.
Yeah.
Sometimes we try to make things so difficult. We think everything that's science related, especially, we try to make things so difficult. We just try to complicate things when life can really be so simple.
We've gone full circle, haven't we? This is what we said about communication. We overcomplicate it. And it's the same with everything. Neuroscience is so easy, and I'm working with Dr. Hilary Fern-Pollack. She's my in-house biopsychologist, and she's amazing. And she does all of the neuroscience stuff, and she's the one with all the hefty research and all that kind of stuff. And what I do is I dumb it down so that it's digestible to the man on the street. And together we have such a laugh. But we create something that is really understandable and isn't overcomplicated, I wouldn't be able to do it with authority without my Hilary by my side.
Shout out to Hilary,
yeah.
to Dr. Hilary. Well, and I can understand that as well, because I have more clients than not just want to find ways to feel better. They're not so deeply interested in the neuroscience of how havening or hypnotherapy or mindfulness can help them get from A to B. They're really more interested in, please help me and give me the tools so that I can feel better, But then there are those that are more interested. And that was actually a part of your essence analysis, is wanting to know the answers, And if we can briefly break down, I'd love to do that. What exactly are the core values? There's a number of them, just to give people an idea briefly.
There are 6 core values, and the core values fit under those umbrellas. So the umbrellas are the ones that we measure, because those are the ones that we can measure against each other. And we've got the 3 that we share are aesthetic, which is actually, aesthetic is all about these are people that really want to understand their purpose. These are people that want that spiritual enlightenment. They see beauty and they see awe more readily than some of the other people. And so all of the core values that have anything to do with beauty, with harmony, with awe, with spiritual enlightenment, all of that kind of stuff, they all fit under the aesthetic one. The next one that we share is individualistic. Now, individualistic are the people that like to step outside the box. They like to put one foot outside the box and do things a bit differently. They are very, very independent naturally, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you don't have that as a core value, you might look at someone who's individualistic and think, well, why aren't they more collaborative? Why are they so individualistic? Actually, this is, as I said, probably due to the environment that they were brought up in. Maybe they had to be independent. Maybe they had to look after themselves. But these are the people that will carve the paths, the new paths. They're the people that will do things bravely and go where other people haven't gone before, and that's a really nice core value to have, I think. I think we both share social, if I remember. Mm-hmm. So when you mix the social one with individualistic, that's slightly different again, because it flavors, it gives a different flavor to the highest core value. But social is one of the easiest to understand. It's that compassion and, benevolence and the want to be the wind beneath the wings of other people rather than taking the limelight all the time. And that's difficult for people that don't have social to understand. They're constantly trying to work out, well, what's her angle on this? What does she get out of it? Why does she want to do that? She's obviously getting something from it, without realizing that people that have social as a high core value actually just want to do that. They want to give and they want to be of use. There are the other core values. There's theoretical, and theoretical is all about understanding the truth, getting to the research, getting to the truth, getting to the knowledge, who came up with this in the first place. And let's doff our cap to them and say, thank you for coming up with it in the first place. And, and that constant search for knowledge and for the sake of knowledge sometimes is really important to people that have that as a high core value. Utilitarian is one of the other core values, which is everything to do with economics, everything to do with practicality, everything to do with making use of things. And they have a natural ability to be able to do that. So if you're in a restaurant and there's one person at the end that's picking the bill apart and telling everyone how much they owe to make it fair and all the rest of it, there's a chance that they could be the utilitarian because they've always got their eye on the bottom line or the practical element of things. Which one haven't I spoken about? Traditional, I think, is the other one. That's all 6 then, isn't it? Traditional, yep. These are people that like to follow the structure. They like to do things in the way they've always done. They have it could be due to religion, it could be due to culture, but there is quite often a tendency to want to go back to the original way of doing things and keep those values moving forward. These people are very difficult if you want to change their mind about anything because they are steadfast. And when they believe in something, they believe in it 100% and they're unshakable. So all of these, and what I've done with Essence is I've tried to make sure that every single one of these core values is loaded with all the positives about it, but it also is peppered with some of the ways that other people might see you. So if you look at Stuart and I, Stuart, I've been with Stuart for 27 years. He's my rock. He's everything to me. I love him to bits. We have total opposite core values. And yet we get on brilliantly and we're still in love after 27 years. And it's if you ever want proof of the fact that you don't need to share core values in order to be able to get on, just look at Stuart and I, If we argue, you can guarantee it's going to be about something in our core values which is mismatched. But actually, that's also our sanity. So when I'm off trying to save somebody, he's the one that calls me the social justice warrior, and I have to check myself and think, actually, I'm fighting someone else's battle, and they don't really want me to. I'm just doing it because I think I should. And it's a really good way of checking, and so we're each other's sanity in that sense as well.
And I guess that goes back to, in a way, and I don't know if to a T, but it's almost like opposites attract. I mean, we have to find the balance where we're kind of tilted in one direction. Somebody's going to be like, I got you. And then you tilt in the other direction and it's, I got you. And like you said, sometimes when people are exactly alike, it's like, this is boring. I'm just looking in a mirror every day. I already do that already. I don't need another mirror, but there's a balance, right? It does come back to balance.
It depends on what you're trying to do. Some people are very, very happy in relationships with people that have exactly the same core values as them. And that's great. Whatever makes you happy. The one thing I've learned is if anything is going to muck up an analysis, it's love. Let's just get that out there. But if you're building a team in a work environment, then there's a lot to be said for having a mixture of behavior and a mixture of core values. Because this is one thing actually that bugs me all the time. So many people say, Michelle, I only want to hire people who've got the same core values as me. And I have to go, no, you've got it wrong. You're doing it wrong. That's not what it's about. You need You have to accept that people's core values come from their fundamental years. You have to accept that it's because they were brought up in a different way. They had different challenges. They were, they were influenced by different people. So therefore, your core values are likely to be different. It doesn't mean that, you can't work towards the same goal. It's a completely different thing.
Absolutely. And we need that melting pot of different thought and different ideas and things that haven't come into our mindset and our presence. I mean, that's what makes the world so colorful, as you mentioned, and beautiful, is that we're all so different. And there's so many sayings out there about just be who you are, right? Because nobody else is you.
Yeah.
And that is so important. The more we understand that, both in business, which you work with some of the biggest companies in the world, helping people find these core values, and then also on a personal level, where you said love can muck it up, but it can also make it quite beautiful if we're just open to the possibilities, right?
This is all about accepting each other. All of my analyses are about understanding and accepting each other. Understanding that someone has different behavior to you. That's fine. As long as you know what it is and you can compensate and you can meet in the middle, that's what it's about. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, collaboration is the one thing that is going to be the savior of humanity.
And we're seeing more of that even in the last year, I think. In my mind, my words last year were connect and create in 2020. And then we fly into this pandemic and I'm like, whoa, how am I going to connect and create with people when I'm stuck in my home all by myself? And I found that I connected and created and collaborated more with people because I had a different way of communicating that I might not have tapped into before on the level that I am now. And then this year, it's more about aligning. That's my word this year, is alignment. And I feel like I have more tools than I ever did before to be able to create new possibilities and collaborate with people I would have never thought about before.
Yeah, you see, and it's adversity that brings us these lessons. It's always adversity that brings us these lessons.
Yeah.
It's almost like the ground burning down, before the new seedlings come through. It has to go through that process sometimes. I'm not saying that anyone wanted the pandemic. I mean, there's been so much loss and heartache. But we have the ability to be able to look at the positives. And the positives of going through anything like this are the lessons that we learn. And we just have to move forward using those lessons in a way that helps other people. I thought, and I always said this, and you'll hear this from our TEDx talk, I said if we were attacked by aliens, that is probably all we would need in order for us to come together as one race, the human race. If we were attacked by aliens, we would all come together, And I always said we just need a common global enemy in order to see humanity come together. And when the pandemic hit, part of me thought, oh my gosh, this is it. And for a moment, I saw this massive collaboration, people coming together, people appreciating key workers and all of that kind of thing. People really collaborating on a beautiful level, and it passed. This is the sea of life, Hilary,
So how do we get back to that? Because you also mentioned that this whole idea is to give people their sixth sense back. I love when you said that. And how do we find our way back to, when we went through the same thing after 9/11, there was so much collaboration and getting together and let's help and let's do. And now that the world is opening up again after this pandemic, people are falling back into old patterns, but how do we move forward with light?
The way that I look at it, I've got an analogy for everything, Hilary. And the way I look at it, this is an analogy like surfing. And when you catch that wave, that's when you're in that beautiful collaboration. Everything's coming together. Everything is easy. People are collaborating. Life is beautiful. And then you fall off. And what do surfers do when they fall off their wave? they go and they catch another. And that's what we have to do. Every single little piece of adversity that we go through in our lives brings us a little bit closer to understanding what that beautiful collaboration is all about. And we will fall off. We'll fall off that board again and again and again. We need to get back on it and get back on it and get back on it. And, who knows, as the sun's setting, we might catch that one wave that takes us all the way to the shore.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. I would love to just end it on that, but I want to play a little game with you because that was beautiful. And this is something I do with my guests. I just do word association. I'm going to throw out a word to you of our conversation today, just one word. And what I want you to do without even thinking about it, I'm throwing this back at you since I had to take your essence analysis.
Okay.
Without even thinking about it, come back with the first word that comes to mind. Okay? All right. Here we go. Values.
Essence.
Essence.
Oh, are we carrying on with essence? Oh gosh. I don't know. Essence is being.
Okay, being. Good. Tsunami.
Beauty.
Humanity.
Love.
Recalibrate.
Balance.
Compassion.
Benevolence.
Communication.
Flow.
Adversity.
Power.
Balance. Harmony. Yeah, cool. Loved it. I love that you threw back some of the words I actually had written down and it was your reply to some of the things I said. So it's interesting to kind of sit back and think what comes to mind with what you've created, what we're creating in this world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Food for thought.
That's tough, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
I know when you said core values, I wasn't just, it's not a plug for my analysis. The reason I called it essence is because I truly think that is what's the essence of a human being, is what drives them. It's their core values, for want of a better word. And so for me, that really is key. And that surprised me, actually, some of the words I came up with.
Because you didn't think about it.
Yeah.
It was your subconscious.
Yeah.
And I love that, and I love doing that because it really makes people think in the moment, boom. And then afterwards you're like, wow, I said that. And then they hear it later when the podcast is up and they're like, wow. So if it touches people, it's that one starfish you throw back. I mentioned that a lot. If it makes a difference in the ecosystem, right? Which we're doing every day. Hopefully we're making a difference in the ecosystem. I do want to remind listeners, Michelle Mills-Porter, who joins us here today, she's the people reader. She's amazing. I'm so glad that we are in alignment with the essence analysis and so much more. You are the sister from another mister. I love that. But she is offering the essence analysis for Holistically Speaking listeners. So I'll add the link of how you can touch base with her. And trust me, you will love every minute of it. And if you get a chance to connect with her personally, you will love it even more. So thank you for being here. Thank you for shining your light. And thank you for just being you.
Oh, well, thank you for letting me.
So I've got some great news for Holistically Speaking listeners. Michelle is graciously offering a free essence analysis to all of you who are tuning in. Just connect with her on her website to find out more. That link is available on the podcast page. And if you would like to work with me on your own healing journey, just set up a free discovery call by connecting with me on my website at hilaryrusso.com. I'd love to support you and show you how you can put the power of emotional well-being in your own hands. And be sure to stay in the know by connecting with me on social media, Clubhouse, and LinkedIn at Hilary Russo. I'd love to hear from you. Holistically Speaking is produced by Alan Seals with music by Lipphone Redding and recorded on Squadcast. And all of this wouldn't be possible without listeners like you. So thank you. And until next time, be kind to your mind and don't forget to laugh.